A word of warning, this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes some strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing.
Hello. Welcome to True Crime News, the podcast. We're covering high-profile and under-the-radar cases from across the country every week.
You may notice this episode looks a little different this week. Your regular host, Anna Garcia, is out, and we will be filling in.
Yes, we will. I'm Kim Kantner.
I'm Julie Golden.
And we are the co-hosts of True Crime News Presents American Hustlers. Julie, tell the audience, what is American Hustlers?
American Hustlers tells the true story of the gay grifters, a notorious crime posse who, for about 10 years, robbed a collective millions of dollars and ultimately murdered an innocent man. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Odyssey, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or...
well, I mean, any other place you can find podcasts.
Yeah, wherever you find your podcast, you will find us. And now on to what brings us here today.
So our case this week takes place, and it's horrible. Horrible doesn't even do it justice. I can't even probably find the words that does this case justice. But so far what we know is the case took place in St. Petersburg, Florida, and a 16-year-old girl named Miranda Corsette met up with a guy on social media and went missing for many days and was eventually murdered and dismembered. It's a gruesome one. The details are dark and depressing, and that's what we know so far.
We are recording this on Friday, April 25th, 2025. And our guest today to help walk us through this horrific crime is Phillip Hamilton, an attorney, legal analyst, and dear friend of the show. Phillip, welcome.
Kim, Julie, thanks for having me. Ready to get this talk going. This is a tough one.
It is a tough one for sure. I have done a lot of true crime, and this one in particular is just horrifying. It's just horrifying. The predation that took place, the torture, just everything was just not great at all, to say the least.
Yeah.
So here are the basics of kind of what we know about the suspects. Stephen Gress, 35 years old, and his girlfriend, Michelle Brandis, also 35 years old. They have been charged at this point, first-degree murder and kidnapping in connection with the death of Miranda Corsette, who, like I said earlier, was 16 years old. Miranda was apparently held captive and beaten 4 days. And also, apparently, pictures were sent to some of Stephen Gress's associates and friends, and also his mother, allegedly. No one has said anything about it until it was too late.
So sticking to the timeline, Kim, what happens after they meet?
According to her suspected killer, the torture began after a dispute over a ring that belonged to Stephen went missing. The ring couldn't be found. Stephen was allegedly accusing Miranda of stealing it. And according to Stephen, after he spoke to police, he said that when he confronted her about the ring being missing, that she mocked him. And because she mocked him and because this ring was very important to him, he started to beat her. That's allegedly what began the beating, and what progressed the beating was this missing ring.
So this is a horrifying case, particularly for just a civilian like myself. When you hear about a case like this, Phillip, how does it make you feel?
I mean, as a human being, I'm with you too. It's, you start to try to find some rationalization, some understanding as to how another human can treat another like that, allegedly. But we're here talking about it, right? Clearly, Miranda is no longer here. It sounds like she was viciously tortured and killed. Her family doesn't have the peace from being able to find the body. I mean, the one thing I can tell you to the extent that Anna and I have these conversations a lot whenever I'm on the show, these are just the kind of cases that even as a criminal defense attorney, we wouldn't even start to think about to take, right? If someone called us in regards to being able to defend on this matter, it's something that just from a general basis, we wouldn't move on. That said, you would expect maybe the family to come to you and say something along the lines of, we think that there are some mental health related issues. And I would 100% have to agree with that. Not knowing anything further about the case, there's clearly something wrong with this person or whomever it is that killed Miranda. But on these facts, it's a tough case. And as a human being, I feel, even as a criminal defense attorney, no different than anyone else does that has a heart, a soul, a rational mind regarding hearing facts around this. So it's tough to long-windedly answer your question.
So when you say as a defense attorney, this is the kind of case that gives you pause, is it because it's impossible to defend, or it's just like too disturbing? Or is that's not even a thing as a defense attorney, too disturbing?
No, I mean, well, again, if you're a defense attorney, and I count myself amongst many in the bar, particularly in New York, that like we can see a case for what it is. Our job often is just holding the government to its burden with regard to these allegations, right? But to more personally answer your question, the weight is just heavy, right? Like even as a defense attorney, you have to carry that weight. Most likely, in situations like this, where you're dealing with like torture and this kind of just malcontent and just bad, outright, mean, vicious, inhuman treatment towards another human being, you have to start to go into the history of your client to understand why they did this. When you think through like the psychiatric evaluations and just going more into the family history, I wouldn't doubt that there's a lot of abuse on his end. And I'm not saying any of this to rationalize and justify if he in fact did commit this murder, to justify what he did. But I'm just being frank with you from being on the professional side of things and being on the side where you have to kind of get to know your client. Going through that history is typically tough, because then you're hearing about all these crimes and offenses that were partaken upon them, that then led them to have this kind of detachment from society. Or if they didn't have those things, then they're just outright evil. Either which way, that's a tough road to take. And there are certain attorneys, God bless them, in regards to, again, holding the government to its constitutional ideals and burdens to come in and defend on those cases, because from a due processual standpoint, we all have those rights. I'm just telling you personally, it is hard to carry the weight of a case like this all the way around, both from the victim standpoint and then also from the accused. Because again, if he in fact did do this, right, if the weight continues to show, as it is at an early stage, that, there's more than enough probable cause to believe that he did, going down that road with that kind of a client, it's just heavy, and it's just not where we are as a firm and on our practice at this standpoint.
And there were two of them involved, allegedly, right? There's Stephen Gress, 35, and there's his, on and off girlfriend or on girlfriend, not entirely sure of their relationship at this point, Michelle Brandis. So it allegedly took two to tango on this. We'll get to some of these details in a second, but I guess when you're looking at, to go back to what you said about, the potential mental health issues for the accused, now we're talking about two people involved in that versus pure evil. And I would imagine early on for a defense attorney, weighing whether to take this case, like, you don't know right now. Are two people pure evil? Are two people, do they have mental health issues? So that must be also something that you have to weigh, yes?
Certainly, especially if you're in private practice and deciding which cases you're taking, as opposed to being a public defender, which, early in my career, I began at. So when I think through just experientially how to even describe the, say, onboarding process on a case like this, it's tough. And even, that's a good point, because, allegedly the girlfriend was a part of this as well. And now you have him, Stephen, pointing the finger at Michelle as being, the murderer of Miranda. Even Michelle, there's all these allegations of, domestic violence, and, his behavior terrified me such that I was, complacent in whatever was happening. I mean, you two can just hear it. It is a deep mess, even without being super deep. I mean, we're literally only 10 minutes into this conversation, and it's already heavy. Now, imagine litigating a case like this for a year. Having dealt with individuals that, present either from the mental health standpoint that something is just detached and that something's not connected and causing this type of behavior, and or what we would otherwise just say evil people, going through that trajectory, the experience is there more from the beginning of my career as a public defender. But I'm just telling you, if we can tell at the outset how difficult it is to discuss it, being a year, 2 years into litigation, trying it, having to see the photos, imagine if, her remains are recovered, it just gets heavy, you two. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I hear you.
You know how you see those posts all over social media that if you didn't stop to get that coffee every day going into work, by the end of the year, you would have saved, I don't know, $1,000, $2,000, unless, of course, you do 6 shots in your coffee beverage. Anyway, that really got me thinking about how just a little bit of money saved every day can really result in huge savings. And that brings us to today's sponsor, Acorns. April is Financial Literacy Month. That's right. They made a whole month reminding you to finally take control of your money. Good news is you don't need 30 days. Acorns makes it easy to start saving and investing for your future in just 5 minutes. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that matches you and your money goals. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you get started with the spare money that you've got right now, even if all you've got is spare change, like from the coffee. I know investing can be confusing at times. There's no one way to do it, and there's no rule book that you must follow. That's one of the reasons I like Acorns. It makes investing simple. Sign up now and join the over 14 million all-time customers who have already saved and invested over $25 billion with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/truecrime or download the Acorns app to get started. Paid non-client endorsement compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/truecrime.
All right, so let's back up for just a sec to go over some of just the facts on this case that we know so far. As to your point, it's very early. Things are going to change. More evidence is going to come to light, I imagine. So anyway, just to go over what we know now. So Stephen Gress and Miranda Corsette met on a dating app, Grindr.
They met on that dating app. They struck up a conversation February 2025, and the 16-year-old and 35-year-old continued exchanging messages before Miranda eventually agreed to meet up with Stephen. Obviously, when I read this story as a parent, I was horrified. And then also as somebody who's on the apps herself. I mean, it is, I guess it's just a dangerous world, and we all have to be careful. And I guess we'll never know why Miranda was on Grindr of all places. But she was a troubled youth, confused. It sounded like she had some mental issues that she was working through, according to the police.
I wonder, from your perspective, Phillip, I wonder if this is Stephen's first time allegedly doing this, meeting a victim on a website, bringing them to his house, doing whatever, and having it escalate from, is this the first time that he's done this, to a horrific murder and a horrific way of disposing of the body and seemingly no remorse, which we'll get to that later. I guess I wonder in my head, has he potentially done something similar to this with other victims, but they've gotten away, or, he's let them go and for whatever reason, it hasn't been reported or he hasn't been caught. I couldn't find his criminal record in the Googling I did and the court documents that are out there so far. I haven't seen his full, criminal record to know if there's anything, remotely similar to this in his background. But I just wonder, from your perspective, do you think this is his first time doing anything like this?
Well, I know, just as we were all preparing for this conversation, just some of the articles that, we had shared amongst ourselves and that we were reading, there were some tidbits about maybe prior animal abuse on Stephen's part, and some concessions or / admissions regarding being harmful to animals. So you don't have to be a forensic psychiatrist to know that a lot of people that exhibit those early violent tendencies toward animals, it's only a matter of time before they transition over to human beings. I mean, that's just kind of a fact, straight out of the DSM-5, right? So for him, Is it the first time? The way you say sometimes things will come to light, usually when these cases get into the spotlight, it's an easier way for them to come to light. Why? Because we now all publicly know that he's incarcerated, that it may be a little bit harder for him to retaliate or be retributive if someone comes forward. So if someone can now see that he's allegedly hurt someone, but that he's in jail, it could give them the courage to come forward. Kind of like sometimes how we see analogously, like in the sexual assault related cases, say from like the Me Too era, which we're still in, right? Once the door is opened and accountability is placed on someone, there at times is a little less fear. Not to say it takes everything away, but there's less fear for, former victims to come forward. And the same thing could work in this context as well. I mean, certainly I think the three of us would hope that there is no other situation like what happened to Miranda out there at the hands of Stephen. But would the three of us be surprised if there was? I don't think so. The way that we started this conversation, I don't think we'd be surprised at all.
Just to touch a bit more on Stephen Gress's history, there is this roommate, who on again, off again roommate that came forward, after the fact, who apparently stayed at Stephen's house, again, off and on, who claims that Stephen was very abusive and often preyed on women that he knew he could exploit. So, to go back to like, is this the first time this happened? According to this, what this roommate is saying, allegedly it's not. I imagine, to your point, Phillip, more will become clear as days and weeks pass and the investigation progresses.
Yeah.
And he was known to seek out people that were, vulnerable. How he was able to tap into those, people, I don't know. So the roommate told police that after days of repeated abuse, Michelle strangled the teen to death. And she also claimed that Miranda never stole the ring of Stephen's that was missing in the first place, and that this roommate believes that Michelle had purposely taken the ring to just try and turn Stephen against Miranda. Whether she did that or not, we don't know. And what her intentions were behind that, we also don't know. But according to the roommate who knows, Michelle and Stephen, she thinks it was, like I said, for Stephen to turn against Miranda and then get Miranda out of Stephen's life so that, Michelle was back in, so to speak.
And then after the killing, this is, to me, perhaps the most chilling part. The roommate reportedly accompanied Michelle and Stephen to Michelle's mother's house. According to the warrant, Stephen dismembered Miranda's body, eventually putting the remnants into trash bags.
So a bit about our victim, Miranda Corsette. Here's what we know so far. She was 16 years old. She was known to the police in St. Petersburg that she had been a runaway. I don't know how many times, and she suffered with some drug abuse issues and also had her own mental health issues. And being 16, she was a mother herself. She had an 11-month-old baby. And both of her parents were deceased. We don't know how. We don't know any details behind that. And she was living with her grandmother. And, part of the, because the torture went on so long and she was missing for many days, but because of her history as a runaway, it wasn't an immediate trigger to her grandmother to, reach out to authorities and say anything. This had happened in the past, but what finally brought her to police was, I think, on the 9th day that she hadn't heard from Miranda at all. She reported her missing to police and also began actively searching for her herself. And at that point, unfortunately, what we know now is it was too late. And yeah, the grandmother was just like, she always came back. She always came back. She always came back. And then this time, unfortunately, she didn't. So, this runaway situation is, just ripe for controversy, right? Because some parents will report someone missing, 2 hours after they didn't come home from, soccer practice. And it could be that they were abducted after soccer practice, or they could be at, a coffee shop getting a latte. The runaway and the time frame and all of that is just, it's a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah, super tough, because then the investigation gets off to a very slow start, right? And the more behind the curve investigators are, the more difficult it is to potentially prevent something that, I'm sure the grandmother would hate to hear me say this, could have been prevented, right? But I guess she's looking at it, I'm talking grandma, from like a relative standpoint of, to your point, it's common for her to come and go such that 4 or 5 days after she's not home, you're not thinking anything may be wrong. That's tough, especially, I think I missed the part about her being a mother, so young herself, and still, unfortunately, being in a position where she could be preyed upon like this. You really hate to hear it, because now her child has to grow up already with, it sounds like, a lot of the challenges we're hearing that Miranda had. I mean, her parents were deceased, and to hear that your mother passed this way in a very public, was murdered in a very public manner. It's like generationally, here we go again for them. That sucks.
It does. It's so sad and tragic for that child. And reportedly, what we've been able to read is the father, the father of Miranda's child was not in the picture, and now the mother of Miranda's child is not in the picture. So it's just heartbreaking. It's really, really, really heartbreaking.
So this next piece is bizarre to me. Phillip, maybe you see this all the time, but I whenever I hear about couples who come together to commit these kind of monstrosities, I'm super confused and even more disturbed. So Stephen was in a relationship with Michelle Brandeis, who I believe was 35. They were both 35 when he began talking to Miranda. And according to an associate of Michelle's, Stephen wanted an open relationship and pursued other women. However, Michelle was extremely jealous. Again, these are all just claims. So one of the theories by, I guess, this acquaintance of Michelle was that that maybe Stephen's recent relationship with Miranda, the much younger woman, may have been enough to send Michelle over the edge. But I'm sorry, like, there's envy and jealousy, and then there's this. I have so many questions about their dynamic, but from what you've read and from what you know, Phillip, what are you gathering from the dynamic between Michelle and Stephen and culpability?
Look, on these specific facts, do I see this often? Absolutely not. This one is up there in terms of bad, but maybe more from like the general premise of times when women who are in relationships with men, typically I've seen it, very controlling men, abusive men, who are also involved in a life of crime, whether that be bank robberies, whether that be assaulting people, and at times killing people, right? You have situations where women may be involved in either the actual act or the cleanup of the act or the cover up of the act. And what do we typically see? We typically see the woman become the cooperator with the prosecutors, right? Whether at the federal or the state level, they will typically cooperate based on that same premise I said earlier, which is, okay, now from a domestic standpoint, I'm kind of out of harm's way, even though psychologically I'm still very afraid of this man. And that part is always going to take time. At least from a physical proximity standpoint, he's in jail, right? And I, even maybe being in jail myself, have a level of protection that I just didn't have being in the home or wherever we lived with that man. And it makes it a little bit easier for them to share details, to share facts about why they did what they did. And it's typically because of the rampant abuse, whether physically or psychologically, that they were taking on from their partner, from whatever man they were with, whether that's a husband, boyfriend, you name it. So you see it as a premise. But in terms of the level of these facts, if what they're saying Michelle did occurred, this is another level of that. If we were to even give her that excuse, because for all we know, she's evil too, right. Or more than him. I don't know. I guess more light will be shown as the case continues to go forward. But it does sound like she had issues with rage and envy. And I think with our prep for just this conversation, I read that, it may even have been a setup, that she hid a ring from Stephen that was very important to him so that it would be blamed on Miranda. And then his rage about that ring, she knew, would cause him to harm her and or kill her. So what a mess.
Just to get some facts out there about the case, here's what we know so far, timeline-wise. On February 14th, obviously Valentine's Day of 2025, Stephen picked up Miranda. They had a meetup somewhere. We don't know where they went, before going to Stephen Gress's home in St. Petersburg, which is only 5 miles from where Miranda lived with her grandmother. Stephen later told police that he believed that Miranda was, around 21, before eventually finding out she was just 16. They apparently spent the day together, hung out, did whatever they did, and then Stephen took her home.
The pair made plans to meet the following day on February 15th, 2025. Miranda again met with Stephen at his home in St. Petersburg. She reportedly stayed with Stephen and Michelle for a couple days after arriving at the home. This encounter would be the last time that Miranda would ever be seen alive again.
So 2 days after Miranda went to hang out with Stephen for the second time, there's ring camera footage that's, of course, in the dark, but allegedly shows or appears to show both Stephen and Miranda kind of coming to and from the residence and doing something at the car. She seemingly appears healthy and calm, as does he. There seems to be, again, what you can take from ring camera video is what you can take, right? That's what my eyes saw, is two people just kind of meandering to and from the car, calmly, casually. And then that, as far as I know now, is the last time anyone saw her alive, was from that ring camera footage from the 17th. Yeah. And then that leads to the other ring camera footage, which is from February 24th, which shows Stephen at like 3 o'clock in the morning-ish carrying what appears to be a body covered by a blanket, same view, obviously, to the car, to the trunk, and putting it in the trunk. And I don't know if I'm imagining this, or I don't know if I am really seeing this, but in the footage, it appears as though he's carrying her like this, and her legs are kind of over to the side. And you can see what appear to be 2 legs draped over someone's arm as he's walking with her. It's just awful. But Phillip, talk about this as evidence in a case. What does ring cam video, what do these photos that he allegedly took and sent to his acquaintances and sent to his mother, what does this photographic and video potential evidence do for a case like this?
I mean, the sending of the videos, the sending, the messages that comport with her torture, her assault, and that potentially add up to her murder, it certainly shows like a wanton and reckless disregard for the health and well-being of Miranda. I think the ring video basically showing him carrying a body, if you want to talk from a criminal defense standpoint, that certainly is a bad fact. There's no fact that, short of it wasn't her, it was someone else that I was carrying out, but it wasn't her. Like, I don't know what you do with that. Like, especially circumstantially with everything that's already built in here, it's a tough case. This isn't one where you're wiggling out on some technicality, short of the prosecution making just some grave, really boneheaded, dumb mistake. As long as they just play the game of trial and litigation normally and don't play outside the bounds, just play it conservative, it sounds like a win. I mean, just based off of everything that I'm hearing and having read, and as we discuss these videos, it's a very tough case for them. And I think it's why the state is seeking the death penalty in this case, because, as you know full well, that's a very high burden to carry, because there's typically going to be 2 phases. There's going to be the trial, there's going to be the penalty phase. And as the state, you have to be very sure and confident of the evidence you have before you expend those resources to try and have someone convicted of capital murder and ultimately executed, via the death penalty. And they're moving forward quite quickly in this situation because of what thus far has been seen. So I think for the defense, it's a bad fact, very bad fact.
So another question along those lines, which Kim and I have talked about. So he was allegedly sending photos of the abuse where she was badly bruised and horrifically disfigured, bragging about these.
And increasingly.
Like,
as days went by, she just looked worse and worse and worse. And allegedly people were getting these photos.
Allegedly he sent photos of Miranda to his mother. Where is she in the culpability justice lineup here?
Great question, Julian. I mean, I've thought about this. I mean, do they have her on some sort of aiding and abetting type of theory? Because I think that's where we would go if we were looking at this more from like a good Samaritan law type of standpoint. Could we look at her as an aider and an abetter? Because we would say she certainly had knowledge of someone who was being harmed, if not from a life-threatening standpoint, and sat back and did nothing, didn't call the police. I don't even know if there's any text messages we would see where she's telling her son, hey, stop, let her go, right? Like just even something to that level. So if it's not there, I think they could certainly bring some theory under the aiding and abetting umbrella. And I'm sure any jury of, rationally minded people would love to convict her of it. It's just legally, are they going to be able to, without her having taken some affirmative or executive action, say to like help him take the body to wherever it was going, or telling him, hey, bring her over here and we can bury her in the backyard, right? Like something a little extra affirmative is typically where you'll see those types of charges, those obstruction charges brought upon others who either helped or were more tacit in terms of not doing what they should have done. But I don't doubt that the prosecution right now is just clearing from a legal standpoint, being able to bring charges against mom and all the other people that were aware of this and who did nothing and who didn't inform the police. Because from a criminal justice standpoint, if nothing else, you want a deterrent. You don't want in the future people to be able to receive messages like this and feel as though they won't be held responsible if they don't do anything. You know what I mean? So yeah. I definitely think the state's probably looking into it. It's just how the law is written in Florida under their aiding and abetting theory, I think will determine if they're actually legally guilty. Because as the three of us sit here, we know mom and all of those from a moral and a philosophical standpoint, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, there's no doubt they should have called the police. They should have taken some kind of action, stop it when they knew about it and no one else did, And
what about the roommate who in theory was there, privy to everything, and then helped dispose of the body?
Yeah.
That's a crime. That's a crime. There's no, is there a legal theory for that? I mean, there's the obstruction, there's the, the desecration of a body, there's the, you name whatever law they need to show intent and knowledge, they can get the roommate. I don't think that's going to be an issue. It's just, what are they going to charge the roommate? In terms of being like a cooperating witness, the roommate is going to have all the incentive in the world to tell everything that she knows so that she's not ending up in a charge of capital murder or some way or another where she's going away for decades on end. So I'm sure when we talk about things that are going to come to light, that timeline will come to light and most likely is going to come from that roommate.
And I don't know, hope you can probably speak to this obviously more than I can, is the fact that the roommate did eventually, even though obviously too late, go to police and share these details. Does that help the roommate's potential charges? I mean, it was too late, but the roommate did eventually come forward and share these details.
Yes, because you don't even have to be a criminal defense attorney to know let's presume there is a sentencing for her. That's going to be the exact argument that's coming out of the criminal defense attorney's mouth, looking for mitigation, and or the argument is going to be made to the prosecution at an early stage of the case to kind of let her skate charges, because kind of without her, maybe this doesn't come all the way to the police's attention. And the fact that she's willing to give all of the information to help the state get a conviction in a capital case against Stephen and or Michelle.
And that also brings me to the next person that came forward. And I think it was kind of from what we know at this point, a tandem combination of this roommate and the details they shared, and also an associate of Michelle Brandis's, because she, after all of this happened, allegedly told an associate of hers that she was involved in this murder and some of the details. And as soon as that person heard this, they boogied straight to the police and were like, hey, this is what this person told me. This person is missing. We know that now because it was public at that point that Miranda was missing. And really that associate of Michelle's was a huge part of the glue that led to them, putting out arrest warrants basically for Stephen Gress and for Michelle Brandis. So after the roommate came forward and after the associate of Michelle came forward with the details that person knew, the police, had arrest warrants for both Stephen and Michelle. They didn't have to look far for Stephen because he was already in jail on another charge, which speaks to what we spoke of earlier about, prior abuse. Apparently, he pointed a harpoon at Michelle, and some neighbors reported that there was trouble. Police came, they arrested Stephen on the spot, and he was already in jail at the time of this arrest warrant. And Michelle, I can see in her pictures, has like a black eye, scratch over her, something like she definitely was in some sort of physical altercation. I don't know with whom. Was that Stephen or someone else? We don't know. So he was already in jail, so they didn't have to arrest him, but they did obviously, charge him with first-degree murder and kidnapping at this point. And then Michelle was in the wind at that point. So the police held a press conference, and it was pretty decently long. It wasn't just like a 30-second, like, hey, we're looking for these people in connection with Miranda Corsette's murder. Like it was, they had some details. They shared the details. They were fairly transparent, and they basically pleaded for Michelle to turn herself in. She did. She turned herself in. What does that, if anything, these details are horrible, and we'll get to what Stephen unpacked and what Michelle unpacked after they, were interviewed by detectives. But turning yourself in, does that do anything for charges like first-degree murder and kidnapping, or is it just no?
No. The level of mitigation that, at times when you're thinking about bail eligible offenses or offenses where you can be trusted to stay out of jail while you're awaiting trial, with these kinds of charges and the exposure from a prison standpoint and or the death penalty, they have every motive and incentive to flee. And so once a court has them, they're going to hold them. And, also to your point, Kim, it's not like she turned herself in the day of or ran to the police and said, hey, we did this terrible thing. You turned yourself in when all of the walls were falling around you and when the spotlight was upon you. So no, you're not going to get a cookie for that, nor bail. You're going to be held in through the course of trial and until there's a disposition in this matter.
Well, and then, of course, once they're both arrested, they turn on each other, which I'm sure happens all the time.
Prisoner's dilemma.
Say that again, Philip?
Prisoner's dilemma.
Yes, prisoner's dilemma. So then allegedly, Stephen tells authorities that after days of torture, Michelle shoved a billiard ball down Miranda's throat. She then reportedly covered the teen's face in plastic wrap. Police say that Stephen claimed he told Michelle to cut holes in the plastic so Miranda could breathe, but that never happened, and the teen suffocated. So if you're representing Stephen in this story, what do you do with this information?
Nothing more than I could do with the Ring videos, with the messages to his friends and or mother, and every other inculpatory statement or action that he's taken throughout the course of the entire conversation that we've just had, in addition to probably stuff we don't even know. There's really nothing you can do with it. I'm starting to look into, why did you do this? Not how can we get you off from this? Or how can we say you didn't do this? I need to now go more to the question and answer of why, so that we can start the process of maybe trying to mitigate you not going to die and maybe just settling on life without parole. That's where we are with all of this at this point.
So it's not now a balance of who is responsible for which piece of this. Like, they're both equally culpable. And if you're representing Michelle in this scenario, what do you do?
Okay, now if I'm representing her, I'm blaming him for everything. And that involves, you see what he did to Miranda. Michelle was always living under the, psychological torment and fear that Miranda could be her, right? And so then you need to start to detail their relationship, their history, the roommate talking about prior abuse, and all fingers are at him so that you, Michelle, can try in some way to avoid the death penalty and maybe get a sentence of life without parole, or maybe you go for gusto and try to get some opportunity for parole later. But they are both equally in a very bad position, and legally, if the allegations are proven by the state, they can both legally be held responsible for Miranda's death. No matter who choked her or who dismembered her, they both can be jointly culpable and responsible.
So the body has not yet been found. What does that do to the case?
Without a body, you can still prosecute a murder. You can still prosecute a capital murder. It does give the defense one last opening to say they haven't even proven that she's dead. And here we are potentially about to send someone to the electric chair or to be lethally injected. But something tells me, when we talk about the prisoner's dilemma, when we talk about the situation with the roommate, something tells me someone's going to end up saying what happened to the body. So let's say there's not a body. I had read something about maybe an incinerator had been used at some point in the situation. But if Michelle can testify to that, or if Stephen can testify to that, one of them may have an incentive to say what happened to Miranda's body, to literally try to save their own lives, not because they're trying to be good people, but they're selfishly trying to not end up dead the way in which they may have actually killed Miranda.
And at this point, we also have, this on again, off again roommate who was there for this journey, allegedly. Right. I mean, I don't know that you'd put yourself in that position if you weren't actually there. So the fact that this roommate has said, we went to Michelle's mom's house and then we drove around and celebrated Michelle's birthday with some super random details. And then we drove to a dumpster. And the location of the dumpster in the town it was in was obviously relayed by this roommate. And then I believe, I don't know that this is true, that when the dumpster was picked up and the garbage in that dumpster was taken wherever it went, that's where the incineration is thought to have happened. Again, I don't know this for sure, but I think that's where that came into play, I believe. So, Phillip, at this point, both Stephen Gress and Michelle Brandes have been charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. And as you mentioned, the DA is already throwing the death penalty out in this case. So that's where they stand right now. Do you think this is death penalty eligible?
Yes. There's no further explanation. Yes. I mean, it's wanton disregard. It's intentional. And it's certainly, from a deterrent standpoint, one that especially the state of Florida would want to send a message that this isn't okay, nor is it going to fly here. And if you think that you're just going to do 10 or 15 years after treating another human being like this, you're going to learn. And so I think that's exactly why they are moving for capital charges. And I think why they could ultimately get a conviction on.
And as for Miranda's child, she's apparently living in the care of Miranda's grandmother, Rita Farnham, according to police. In a statement to the Tampa Bay Times, Rita thanked the man who came forward with Michelle's alleged confession to the brutal killing. She told the outlet, "If not for him, we would never know what happened to Miranda," writing, "My family is very grateful to him." Well, that's our show for the week.
Phillip, thank you so much for being our guest this week. It was a pleasure to meet you, and I hope we did Anna justice of sitting in her place this week. But please tell everyone, where they can find you.
Absolutely. If you happen to be in New York, we're right at 48 Wall Street, Hamilton Clark LLP, and certainly across social media. You can find me at ESQ Hamilton. That's across platforms.
You can find our episodes wherever you get podcasts, subscribe to True Crime News channel on YouTube, and sign up to receive our newsletter at truecrimenews.com.
Until next week, this is True Crime News, the podcast. Thanks for tuning in.